Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining our May webinar. Our talk or topic for today is Save Time Upgrading from Drupal 7 to Drupal 10 using Retrofit. And I probably should share my screen so you can see. Can you all see the screen? Okay. So before I hand over the reins to our speaker, Matt Glaman, did I pronounce your last name correctly?
Yes, you did.
Awesome. I want to talk about Drupal for Gov and what we do. We are a community of open source advocates and we love all things open source. So in addition to this monthly webinar, which we hold every third Thursday at 3 p.m., we also have our yearly conference, which I'm so excited to say that we will hold our conference on August 13th through the 15th on the campus of University of Maryland. We also hold global training days or half training days, and we organize the Gov Summit. So if you participated or went to DrupalCon last week, you should have seen us there. If you have any questions or are interested in presenting, please reach out to us via email at drupalforgov@gmail.com. We also are available on Slack or LinkedIn. I always like to give a shout out to our sponsors. We cannot do this without them. So our sponsor for the month is Civic Action. We also like to share other camps that are happening within the states and outside of the United States. So for the month of June, it looks like there is a Drupal event happening every week. And there are also events happening in July. So if you have the time or interest, please check them out. Also, periodically through the year, as I mentioned before, we do hold half days or multi-day trainings. If you have the space and the access, please reach out to us. We'd love to talk to you. And you can do that through our email. Also, if you miss a webinar or a Drupal GovCon session, we always upload those to YouTube. And actually today I'm live streaming directly to YouTube. And last but definitely not least, I am pleased to introduce Matt. He is an experienced software engineer and an author of several books, Drupal 8 and 10 development cookbooks. And thank you, Matt. I'm going to stop sharing so that you can share.
All right. Hey, everybody. Thank you for having me. And let's see if I can get this to work right off the bat. All right. I am not going to watch the chat until the end, so I got a Q&A thing at the end.
Okay,
So thanks for coming.
I'll help you moderate too.
Okay, perfect. Thanks for coming. This is Save Time Upgrading from Drupal 7 to Drupal 10 using Retrofit for Drupal. And you may know me also, I'm the maintainer of PHP Stand Drupal and also the Composer Drupal Lenient package that helps you take a module that isn't ready for a certain major version of Drupal, but makes it available. So working on tooling is kind of my thing that I enjoy doing. So let's talk about some of the challenges from Drupal 7 to Drupal 10 when migrating. So the big thing that we always talk about, and I feel like the community has done an excellent job at, is migrating existing configuration and content to its new schema. Node types used to be defined in code for Drupal 7. Now they're a config entity. So we have migrations that set that up. And we have the migrate module along with migrate UI. And Acquia has even introduced the Acquia Migrate Accelerate project. This previously used to be closed source and it was open sourced, I believe, in the fall the fall. So there's a little blog post that will be available in the slides that document how to do this. So we've built some really cool tooling that makes it easy to move your content and data from Drupal 7 to Drupal 10. However, you have to rewrite your custom code from legacy APIs to their modern API equivalents. We're kind of used to this in Drupal, like from 4, 5, 6, 7, it was kind of a little bit of a rewrite. But 7 to 8 was a really big rewrite because we adopted Symfony and a lot of modern practices, things that have made Drupal a lot more maintainable. But it made the 7 to 8 jump pretty big. Here's one example. In Drupal 7, we had the hook menu. I feel like most people have written this to add a custom page. And hook menu powered the routing system, the menu system, local tasks, actions, and probably 2 or 3 other things. It did a lot as one API. In Drupal 8, these were separated to their disparate APIs. So there's the routing.yaml file, which defines your routes in the pages. This now, instead of it being like PHP code and hook menu, is a YAML file that points to your controller and still specifies permissions. But if you want that to show up in a menu, you now have to define a menu.yaml. Not a lot of work, but you're still taking that existing code and splitting it from PHP to 2 different YAML files and having to make sure it works. There's also the joy of rewriting custom themes from the PHP template engine to Twig. This is a good change though, because Twig is far more secure because you're not writing PHP code in your templating, and Twig will auto escape on output. So there's benefits, but again, you're taking a template file that contained PHP to Twig, which has its own templating syntax, kind of the double brackets that I think every language now uses as a form of templating. But you have to touch those files. And probably the biggest one, for me at least, is you have to maintain your existing platform's bugs and tickets and change requests. You have a Drupal 7 site that's running. It's probably a platform that's leveraged by hundreds, if not thousands plus users. You can't just put the pause on it and say, hold on, we're going to move into keep the lights on. Like we're going to do minimal maintenance. There's going to be active feature development in process while having to migrate to Drupal 10. And that's a very big challenge. Like how do you maintain the existing platform while moving to the new one? We built a feature for the previous platform and now we have to take it to the new one. Unless you can clone your team, that's kind of a significant challenge. So again, when does Drupal 7 lose support? Just as a refresher, with DrupalCon just happening, maybe everybody has this fresh in their mind, but Drupal 7's end of life is January 5th, 2025. That doesn't seem too far away. Like as humans, we're really bad at guessing time or really putting it into numbers. That's in the future. I have time. Well, let's get a little businessy here. And let's break it down into quarters, because a lot of us probably plan our sprints and development work in quarters. We are now halfway through Q2. So that means we have Q3, then we have Q4, and then we're in Q1 of 2025 and Drupal 7 is end of life. So if you haven't started yet, that means you have 2 quarters to do the planning and development. If you do 2-week sprints, which is pretty standard, that's about 12 sprints to complete the project. And you know your team better than anyone else. How much capacity do you have in 2 weeks to accomplish maintaining your existing platform and migrating? A lot of times that's going to be a big effort. And hopefully this isn't you right now, kind of like, oh no, I thought I had more time. How can I do this? Well, that's where I really like to introduce Retrofit for Drupal to try to help solve this problem. It actually started as an idea about 4 years ago, but I just threw out the window. It's like, no, shouldn't do that. But it really kicked off at MidCamp 2 years ago when, oh, that's right, it's already 2 years ago. When talking to a few folks about Drupal 7 end of life and solutions, that there has to be another way. Like, what if you didn't have to rewrite all of that code for your custom modules? Think about the cognitive load of your senior developers or your team leads having to go through each pull request that says, oh, hook menu is now a controller class and a YAML file. And did it work? Oh, did we have tests before? No, well, we had hat, but that's not working the exact same way when we put it at the Drupal 10 site for XYZ reasons. You're adding all that extra complexity and load, which means that bugs can be introduced. I've had to do some code reviews for these, and that's a big diff. There's a lot of changed files. It's hard to read. What if we could reduce that so that there was minimal changes made in your code, so you didn't have to worry about that feature that somebody wrote 8 years ago that's critical to the business, and if you touch it, who knows what could happen. Same like, what if you didn't have to rebuild your theme from scratch? I know this is like a given a lot of times, like, oh, we're upgrading Drupal, so let's redesign the theme. We have to touch it anyways. What if you didn't have to? I have been on projects that did a lift and shift where they did not redesign the theme, but a lot of times it's like it just gets thrown in as an extra item. Well, we have to touch the entire theme anyways. What should we fix? Which isn't a bad thing. Same with like migrations. You might say, how can we improve? But when you're in a tight deadline, it'd be great if you didn't have to do that. If it wasn't like we're spending so much time, why not? So like, what if you only needed to refactor about 40% of your code versus 98%? Because again, that hook menu, you don't need to necessarily take your function and make it a class, but you're going to touch everything inside that function anyway, so you may as well. But if you have custom forms, a lot of times that internal form structure is the same. So you might not be touching every line of code, but you definitely will be moving it somewhere else. So Retrofit provides compatibility layers to run legacy Drupal code. So that way you can minimize the amount of changes that are needed and enables you to migrate off Drupal 7 faster and easier. So let's talk about that example I said, where you have the existing platform and you're moving to the news site. What if you're able to start bringing your Drupal 7 code into Drupal 10, and as you made fixes in Drupal 7, you literally did like a cherry pick of a commit and it just worked because the module's there, or you had to just copy paste it, but you'd have to rewrite it into Drupal 10 at the same time. So you can reduce the amount of work that's needed. I have some screenshots in here because when I do conferences, it's never a good idea to do live demos, but I can actually switch over to a live site towards the end of the session to actually show a running site that's going through these. So with Retrofit, this is using the the examples module. So for Drupal 7, Drupal 10, so there's always the examples module that shows how to do things in Drupal. And that was a test case. Like, all right, let's take the menu example, and will the hook menu work? In this case, it is showing that the menu is appearing, and in this hook menu, that was the one from earlier, it said show up in the main menu. And here it is, it's showing in the sidebar as the main menu. Didn't have to rewrite the Drupal 7 code at all, just worked. Here's an example of a form using states. One of the greatest, like a lot has changed, but luckily Form API hasn't. Render arrays haven't really. A few things have tweaked a bit. But if you have a complex form that's using states and you go to that page, it will render the form for you. So instead of having to cut your code out and put it into like a form class that has the submit and the build, Retrofit just does that. So you don't have to move the code around. So your forms can stay intact without having to shift a lot around. Blocks also work. So this is one example where hook menu was one API that was split into 3 different ones. But in Drupal 7 to declare a block, you had like hook block info, hook block configure, hook block view. There's like 5 hooks you needed to make a block work. And Retrofit will define a block plugin in Drupal 10 and it will call all of your previous hooks to operate. So in this example, it had a block contents field that allow you to customize the content of the block, and that will also save it as well. So that way you can customize the block and it works as expected. All right, so it's cool, lots of magic. How does it work? So first off, Retrofit is not a module. In Drupal, we love to call things modules. Modules are things that you can download and then install. Retrofit, once you add it to your site, starts running. So it integrates into Drupal service container automatically, and that's where it performs some of its magic. So it will integrate to the service container and it will say, hey, plugin manager, I'm actually going to decorate you. So that way I can call the previous API hooks. It'll leverage event subscribers and other service decorations to implement the legacy APIs, like hook menu. There's an event called routing alter. When that's invoked, Retrofit calls the hook menu and registers all the routes for you. And it provides plugins and derivatives for APIs that became plugin based. In Drupal, a derivative means you have one class, but you can make it do multiple things. And that's how we know what hooks to call back to. Recently, a DrupalCon 1 concept was to make Retrofit extensible, so that way others can make a CTools based compatibility layer or other things like that to make these other contrib APIs possible to be extended inside Drupal 10. Here's some of the supported compatibility layers. Figuring out a way to document this is my current challenge, but we have hook menu, hook block, hook form. So with that, there's a custom form object and controller that will call your previous form hooks. And also it creates a custom form state object that supports array access. So you can still work with form state as an array. I think this is a pretty cool change. In Drupal 7, form state was an array. In Drupal 8, it became an object. Luckily, PHP has a way for classes to still work as an array. So we're able to create that backwards compatibility layer fairly easily. Hook field for custom fields. So custom fields are registered, save data, widgets and formatters are still in process because we pivoted to themes. So in Drupal, we had hook theme, and we had these wonderful theme functions that weren't backed by a template, but just a PHP function that returned a markup. Drupal 8 got rid of these, but Retrofit brings them back. So you don't have to rewrite anything that's in a theme function. It will call it for you, with the idea that later on you can rewrite it to be a twig template or other. It also supports PHP templates, or as I forgot they were called, tipple-fips. So if you have node.tpl.php in your theme, Retrofit will pick that up and use it over the existing node twig.html. So that way all of your custom theming and HTML and your PHP is leveraged. So that way your site doesn't have to be complete, your theme doesn't have to be completely altered. Maybe a few tweaks as some internals changed. It provides replacements for a handful of the procedural functions like dbSelect, dbQuery. Those are pretty easy to replace. It's just database : method. But if you don't need to change the lines, why? So it provides backwards compatibility for a bunch of these procedural functions to reduce the amount of changes that you have to make. So that way your code just works for the most part. It provides a compatibility layer for the global user object based off the new way that things work. So if you in your code have global user, it will actually interact with the currently logged in Drupal user object. Drupal 7 had hook preprocess and hook process. And I feel like nobody ever knew which one to use, but we used them both. So in Drupal 8, they were removed. It's like we just are going to have preprocess hooks. You could go through your code and then change it to be hook preprocess, but the assumption was always that process hooks ran after every preprocess. It's a way to do like late processing before rendering, which means that your code might break or act differently if you were to just rename it to be a preprocess. So Retrofit will take all of your preprocess hooks and add them at the end of the known preprocess hooks. So that way they kind of operate in the same way. So brought up theme support. So your Drupal theme should just quote unquote work with template overrides. There's a few things that are still needed, such as when you had the style sheets declaration, like automatically turning that to a library and a few things like that, but that's in process to make life a little bit simpler. Drupal add.js supports adding JavaScript settings and also one-off JavaScript files and inline JavaScript. So if you have this in your code base and you don't have the capacity to convert everything to be the new assets library, which you eventually should, you can still leverage the Drupal add.js and Drupal add CSS for those one-off inline items. It should be noted that in Drupal 8, it was explicitly removed because it was a security concern for inline JavaScript. So this allows it to be added back, but let's face it, if you're already doing it, you're doing it. If it can add it, we'll just review your code to say, hey, we shouldn't do this. But again, the idea is to reduce the amount of code that you have to change just for migrating, so that way you can keep things as they are and then fix them on the tail end of the process. So let's dive in how to use Retrofit. So Retrofit runs in your new Drupal 10 code base. You're not putting Retrofit in your Drupal 7 site. Think of Drupal as your runtime or your platform. Your Drupal 7 platform is being end of life, which means you need to take all of your custom modules and put it into the new runtime and new platform that is Drupal 10. So in this case, to use Retrofit, you create a new Drupal 10 codebase or 11, which is composer create project Drupal / recommended project, and then the name Drupal. You go into that directory, and then you do composer require Drupal Retrofit / Retrofit. The project is hosted on GitHub. Now copy in your D7 modules and themes, add the contrib modules you want that are part of the migration. Try migrating your data. See what happens. Does it crash? Does it work? Refactor your code. Like Retrofit right now doesn't fix everything, and it never will be able to fix everything. But the idea is to make it a lot easier. So you can test migrating your data. If it failed, refactor your code because something's not ready for D8. Try rerunning your data again. A great example here is when you migrate your data, let's say you had custom field types. And if the field type is missing, you can't migrate your data. So to begin migrating, you would have to port your field type. And that means running it and rewriting it for Drupal 8, which means you're blocked on migrating your data till you did that development work. And this should simplify that process. So you just have everything mostly there, migrate the data and see where the gaps are. So the benefits of Retrofit. Again, I've kind of been saying this throughout the webinar so far. It allows for incremental updates instead of upfront major changes. And this is a big deal. It'll increase your velocity by reducing the refactoring and cognitive load. Developers are people. Our brains can only do so much in a day. You can have somebody sit with 3 Red Bulls for 12 hours and refactor everything and do the code review, but that leads to burnout. And as somebody who's been a team lead for most of his career, I kind of built this with myself in mind. Like, what would have made my life easier in certain times? Oh, if people didn't need to touch every single line of code and make me have to review it. If there's smaller changes, there's less chances of bugs. It's easier to review. It also makes it a lot safer and more reliable because you're refactoring less. Every time you refactor code, unless you have a lot of test coverage, and even then with test-driven development and all that, nothing's perfect. Every time you touch a line of code, it becomes less reliable. Or I'm sure we've all experienced where somebody refactors the code and then it's like, oh, we can make it better. Like, we can improve it. And then they fix a bug, but guess what? That bug has been a feature for the past 5 years. So in fixing that bug, they've disrupted how the system is expected to work. And now you have to try to guess what happened and why. And that can be really hard if you just re-platformed from Drupal 7 to Drupal 10. So what this also provides is a longer timeline for refactoring legacy code. So again, you can put that in, you can take your Drupal 7 code, put it in a Drupal 10 site, and guess what? Now you're off end-of-life software. Your D7 code, maybe it has things in there, and maybe you had to take a contrib from D7 that wasn't ported, and you're running that with Retrofit now as a quote-unquote custom module. You have a runway now to work and refactor those and get on to Drupal 10 fully. So now you could get off this webinar and say, all right, we're going to make a plan because we haven't started yet. Or we have kind of a plan, we're going to adjust it. Starting July 1st, because I believe that's the start of Key 3, we're going to do 4 sprints, getting our Drupal 10 site up and migrate and getting the code over. And then we're going to use Q4 to verify, test, throw some issues up on retrofits like, hey, this one thing didn't work. Is there a way you can make our life a little bit easier? And then you're going to launch. And then you can take all of 2025 to migrate off of the Drupal 7 code base that's inside Drupal 10. So all of your legacy APIs, you can start moving over, do those refactors, do those improvements. Drupal 8 and beyond adopted PHP unit. Drupal 7 had simple tests. It was a pain to have tests. We had to rely on Behat, which has its own issues, purely because it's not a unit test framework. So you could start writing some unit tests using Drupal's test suites and start to really strengthen your platform and take time to build features, fix bugs, and migrate away at your own timeline without worrying about end-of-life software. So people have asked, well, what about 11, 12, 13? Technically, retrofit will work with any of them. It touches a lot of internals, so there could be a change in like 11.2 that makes retrofit break a little bit because it really goes into things that aren't part of the public API. But as things are deprecated in 10, 11, 12, they can be added to retrofit to help bridge upgrades along the way. The primary focus of retrofit for Drupal is D7 to modern Drupal. But it will add backwards compatibility layers here and there, such as the function module load include. That was removed in 10, I think, and it provides a backwards compatible function. I think it's namespace, so it's like retrofit / module load include. There, if you still need to use that function, you can just add the namespace before the function name or add it to the use statement at the top of the file, and you don't have to change your code. So it will provide some backwards compatibility in those ways, but the main thing is make sure that it works for Drupal 7 code and lets that run in modern versions of Drupal as they're released. One good thing, or actually what's unique about the Drupal 11 release that's coming out this summer, it's not forced. Like we're releasing it to release it, but 9 and 10 were both forced release due to external dependencies. 11's this is a good idea to do and to have a cadence, but like it's not forcing Drupal 10 to be end of life yet. So you could still start with the Drupal 10 site and work forward there, especially since Drupal 11 won't be released before you get started probably. So don't worry, I would say you don't have to worry as much about that because upgrading from 10 to 11 and beyond has become much easier. Some resources that are available for you if you want to learn some more about retrofit. There is a website, retrofit-drupal.com. On my blog post, I've made several blogs, so that's mglommen.dev/tags/retrofit. When doing the template overrides, I had no idea how Drupal actually did this, how it found template overrides. Turns out there's a function invoked in the template environment, so it's like twig something. As I've done some stuff for retrofit, I've explained how it works, but also some of the inner workings of Drupal, which you might find interesting. I have a video up on YouTube showing the demo environment, which I'll hop over to. And then, of course, the code is on GitHub at retrofit-drupal/retrofit. If you want some on-demand support or are interested in contributing, there is the Retrofit channel on Drupal Slack as well. So getting support. So there is the Slack channel, but also there are the GitHub issues and discussions. I recommend using these. You can put it in Slack, but if you put it on GitHub, it means that others can join in and learn as well. Specifically, if you put a discussion, I am a firm believer in GitHub's not completely open, but it's far more discoverable than Slack or direct messages. So if you're able to put it there, I understand that there could be private code involved. And in that case, I'm always open to a ping in the Slack channel and doing like a direct message because you can't put some of that code public. So that's support for you. If you want to support retrofit development, because this was asked previously, I wanted to include a slide. I do have a GitHub sponsors. Retrofit is a personal project that I am running, or honestly, just opening issues for use cases and contributing fixes or suggesting solutions. The project is not 100% complete because it's really hard to know what to build. So it does a lot so far, but it's looking for like product feedback. We have a solution, try it out. If it didn't work or there's something that was broken, provide feedback. Like recently somebody tried it and they have the Zen theme. And when they loaded it, their page just showed a blank white page that said array. So something's printing an array, not sure why. And then that's the next thing to debug and work with them on. It's like, all right, how do we get the Zen theme working with retrofit? I have also thought of doing a paid support ticket system. Haven't yet because I haven't gotten feedback with it, but the idea would be on top of GitHub or beyond GitHub, a private ticketing system so you could share private code or specific requests. I need to gauge the interest and determine pricing on this, but that would be one way to fund development of retrofit, but also give back to people who are funding it and helping them advance on their project. Oh, there's the GitHub sponsors thing. I forgot to take that slide out. And the last slide would be about questions, but real quick, I just wanted to switch screens and do the live demo of the page. So I'm going to try and change over to this screen. All right, so it says it's working. I'm going to assume it's working. So again, this is the Bartik theme from Drupal 7 running on Drupal 10, because who needs the Bartik theme that was extracted from Drupal 9? Let's just run the Drupal 7 version. Here we have the form tutorial from the form example, and actually registered local tasks or tabs. Yeah, tasks show up as tabs. They're not themed, but this actually allows us to go through and find all of the different tutorials. So in here, we're actually able to go through a multi-step form, and this is all, what do you want to call it? Drupal 7 code. So there are a few issues, as you can see here, array offset, but it did bring us through each form. The name came up empty, but it saved the color. As I brought up in my example, the states. So I think this would be one of the biggest issue, like one of the best factors. If you do have complex forms that's using data here, you'll be able to use it. And then also a wizard. So we go through. See, it says do not enter. So it should have thrown the error or the validation error, but it did. It's now showing all the values that were collected along the way. So the multi-step form did work. And then let's go edit this block so I can configure the block. And this block is coming from D7. When I click save, we'll now see that the block updated with this configuration. So there are, like I said, these are the APIs that are working right now. There's more that can be done, and that is involved around people using retrofit and finding the use cases. I know a big one is CTools, aka Chaos Tools, and there will be a new package just for that support, so that way we can convert certain CTools plugins to be their Drupal 8, 9, 10 equivalent. Let's see, it'd be cool to get CTools content types, which were turned into panes and panels, to be blocks themselves. So those are things that will be worked on in the near future, but a big target is also themes. So that's it for the demo. And next, I have time for any questions about retrofit. All right. So any questions? Awesome, thanks. I'm glad you find it amazing. It was an idea I didn't know if it'd be a good idea to build because I was afraid of Franken Drupals, where there'd be some kind of nightmarish things out in the wild. But I figured that's better than having people leave the Drupal ecosystem. I know there are alternatives that are Drupal based, but that's still leaving the ecosystem. And I think Drupal is one of the best platforms out there, and it'd be a shame for people to change off of it because they didn't have a viable upgrade path.
Agreed. Thank you so much, Matt, for especially you saved the day. Because I appreciate you quickly responding as our previous speaker dropped out, and it's such a awesome topic. So thank you.
Thank you for having me.
All right, and thank you everybody who showed up. See you next month.